There was a time before stories, before memory, before language, before even the thought of tomorrow. The earth was young, and so was silence. The wind moved across plains of grass that no one yet named. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled, rivers carved valleys, and not a single mind was there to ask why. Consciousness had not yet entered the stage. Only reaction, instinct, the raw chemistry of survival. Life existed, but life did not know it existed. Somewhere among the billions of heartbeats that pulsed without meaning, a new kind of spark appeared. Fragile, uninvited, yet unstoppable. A spark not of fire, but of awareness. The faint, impossible moment when a creature, for the first time, noticed itself move. That moment changed the universe. The first humans, if we can even call them that, did not arrive as gods of intellect. They arrived barefoot and afraid, blinking at the world with newborn eyes. Their gift was not strength, not speed, not claws or armor. Their gift was simply the ability to notice, to hesitate, to wonder. The dawn of consciousness was not triumphant, it was terrifying. Imagine opening your eyes in a storm and realizing suddenly that the storm could kill you, and that someday it inevitably would. That was the first human thought. I exist, and one day I won't. Awareness was a seed planted in darkness. From that seed grew imagination and fear. The predators that hunted them killed swiftly, but the thoughts that hunted them, those were endless. In the night they gathered around fire, the first mirror. The flames reflected not just light, but the glimmer of thought. They looked into the trembling orange and saw movement that seemed alive. They saw their own shadows flicker on cave walls and mistook them for spirits. Perhaps that's when mythology began, not from lies, but from wonder. Every myth was an attempt to explain what consciousness could not yet bear, the mystery of being awake in a world that will one day forget you. Before there were words for love or death, there was only the feeling, heavy, ancient, that something about existence was temporary. Every sunrise was proof that the world continued. Every sunset whispered that one day it wouldn't. Humanity began, not with power, but with awareness of fragility, and so began the quiet conversation between life and time. Each creature before us lived within the moment. The gazelle runs, the wolf chases, the forest burns, and no one mourns. But humans paused. They remembered. They imagined tomorrow's danger while today's fire still burned warm. That pause, that unbearable pause between what is and what could be, was the birth of anxiety, curiosity, and meaning. Consciousness was not an invention. It was an accident of perception, and from that accident came everything: art, religion, fear, beauty, love. The first cave drawings were not decorations, they were prayers, the earliest attempts to leave a mark before the wind erased the body that made it. Those hands, pressed in pigment on stone, were not merely pictures, they were signatures of existence. They said, "I was here," the first echo of a mind afraid of disappearing. The story of humanity has always been a story of echoes. Sounds cast into time by voices that could not bear silence. Every invention, every word, every monument is an answer to the same unspoken fear, that one day no one will remember we were here. But the paradox is cruel. The very consciousness that creates memory is also the thing doomed to vanish. Every thought dies with its thinker. Every civilization is a sandcastle built on the shore of entropy. Even now, if the earth were to fall silent, the universe would not notice. Stars would continue to burn. Galaxies would keep spinning. The cosmic microwave background, the oldest light, would drift endlessly, untouched by grief. And yet, within this indifference, consciousness arose, like a flame blooming inside cold darkness, a small light that looks around and dares to name the void. Imagine that first moment when awareness turned inward, when a creature realized that its reflection in still water was itself. That was not just recognition, that was the beginning of loneliness. For the first time, the universe had divided into two, observer and observed. The seamless unity of being shattered into mirror and image. That fracture, that sacred wound, is what made humans human. We became the only beings capable of feeling separate from everything that created us. And in that separation, meaning was born. The early world was a chorus of beginnings, the crackle of fire, the whisper of wind through leaves, the rhythm of rain. And beneath it all, the soft hum of neurons awakening, the brain learning to translate sensation into story. Every flicker of lightning became an omen. Every shadow became a possibility. The sky was no longer just above them. It was watching them. They gave it names. They gave it moods. They began to suspect that the universe might be alive, because they were. Awareness projected itself outward, painting the cosmos with emotion. That's what consciousness does. It fills the void with mirrors, and from those mirrors, humanity learned to dream. Thousands of years later, when civilizations rose from the soil and rivers turned into borders, the dream had not changed. Every wall, every city, every temple was still built for the same reason as that first handprint on stone, to outlast the silence. The spark that began in the dark now glowed in language, architecture, song, but the silence never disappeared. It only waited, because consciousness, at its core, is haunted by the knowledge that it will end. Every child that's born inherits not just life, but the echo of that first awareness. The ancient realization that existence is temporary. It's written in our genes, whispered in our sleep. Even the most advanced technology, the grandest dream of immortality, cannot erase the truth that to know you exist is to know you will one day cease to. That's the cruel symmetry of awareness. Every I am hides a silent I will not be. Yet perhaps this is what gives consciousness its power. If we were immortal, we would not need meaning. We would not build or write or love as fiercely as we do. Mortality is not the enemy of awareness. It is its engine. The knowledge of death carved purpose into existence. Every art form, every act of kindness, every scientific discovery, all of it emerges from the same defiance, a refusal to let awareness dissolve without leaving a trace. When the first human buried another, it wasn't ritual. It was resistance, a way of saying you mattered, and so will I. And somewhere in the vast future, long after those first minds turned to dust, humanity built telescopes, mechanical eyes peering into the same void that once terrified its ancestors. We found galaxies beyond count, stars dying and being born, light older than Earth itself. And in that discovery, the ancient silence returned, but in a different form. Not the silence of ignorance, but of understanding. For even as we learned how vast the cosmos truly is, we realized something deeper, that everything we know, everything we feel, is bound to a fragile species on a single pale planet, suspended in endless dark. The same silence that once surrounded the first humans surrounds us still. The only difference is that now we can describe it. If one day humanity fades, if our cities crumble and our signals turn to static, that silence will return fully, and the universe will go on as it always has, vast, indifferent, complete. But before that happens, before the final echo fades, there will have been this moment, the moment when matter learned to think, to dream, to love. And that moment is not small, it is everything, because existence without awareness is blind. But awareness, even for an instant, illuminates eternity. The last human will never know they're the last. But the first human never knew they were the first either. And between those two unknowns lies the entire story of consciousness, a flicker of self-awareness travelling through time, fragile yet magnificent. It began with silence. It will end with silence. But in between there was music, the sound of life noticing itself, and that perhaps is enough. Fire, that was the first revolution, and perhaps the most symbolic one. A creature once afraid of lightning now learned to hold lightning in its hands, and with that the world changed. Because fire was not just heat, it was memory. It taught humanity that the elements could obey, that chaos could be tamed, that night could be softened, that death could be postponed. Around those early flames, the species that once shivered in the dark began to imagine, not just survive, but remember. Every flame became a small sun, and every circle around it a seed of civilization. The spark of civilization was not born from strength or abundance. It was born from fragility. The fragile creature who knew it would die became the first to wonder how to keep its thoughts alive. Language was not invented to trade or command. It was invented to preserve, to give shape to the invisible. Before words, there were gestures and sounds, the rhythm of survival. But as the mind grew more complex, survival alone was not enough. It needed connection. It needed someone else to know. Every syllable, every mark on stone, every song carved into the air was an act of defiance against forgetting. Civilization began as a rebellion against silence. Imagine the first story told by firelight, a hunter describing the sky, the hunt, the mystery of death. The others listen, not because they need to, but because they want to. The words paint pictures in their minds, echoes of things not present. And suddenly the tribe is no longer bound by the immediate. They can remember, they can imagine what has not yet come. Storytelling was the birth of time within thought. It was the first simulation of eternity, a way to make something exist beyond its moment. Every tale whispered in that flickering light was humanity's first form of immortality. From story came structure, and from structure, civilization. The human mind began to build outside itself. It built myths to contain fear, calendars to contain chaos, and gods to contain uncertainty. It built meaning like scaffolding over the unknown. Each belief system was a map drawn over the infinite. Each temple a translation of awe into stone. Each law a ritual attempt to make existence predictable. But beneath all of it, beneath the prayers, the wars, the progress, was the same pulse, a consciousness terrified of vanishing. Civilization, for all its grandeur, was an elaborate attempt to remember itself, and in that remembering it began to forget the silence it came from. As humans multiplied, so did their voices. The world that was once quiet began to hum. Cities emerged like neural clusters, connected by roads that carried language and trade. Humanity became a collective brain, an expanding network of memory, constantly rewriting its own myth. But with connection came complexity, and with complexity came distance. Where once a fire united a few minds, now towers rose to separate thousands. The voice that once told stories became the voice that ruled, commanded, and deceived. The same awareness that made empathy possible also invented hierarchy. Civilization was not pure progress. It was an experiment in consciousness scaling itself, and it came with a price. Still, amid the noise and chaos, the spark of creation burned brighter. Language evolved into writing, thought fossilized in symbol. A human could now speak across centuries, across death itself. A clay tablet, a scroll, a carving on stone. These were the ancestors of memory. Each mark a message from one awareness to another, separated by time but bound by intention. A whisper through eternity. I was here. I thought. I mattered. Every library became a cathedral of ghosts, voices of the dead still thinking through ink and pigment. The invention of writing was not just a technological leap. It was the invention of continuity, of minds conversing beyond their lifespans. Humanity had discovered the closest thing to immortality it would ever have, recorded thought. But the irony is sharp. The same words that preserved memory also created illusion. Once language became permanent, so did the stories, even the false ones. Myths hardened into dogmas, belief ossified into rule. Civilization began to confuse the record for the reality. It forgot that language was only a bridge, and started worshipping the bridge itself. What was once fluid and alive became rigid, and the same tool that freed the mind began to cage it. That is the dual nature of consciousness. It invents beauty to escape fear, then becomes trapped by the beauty it invented. Fire gave warmth, but it could also destroy. Words gave meaning, but they could also deceive. Memory preserved knowledge, but also trauma. Civilization was a mirror of the mind, magnificent, contradictory, fragile. As empires rose and fell, as kings declared themselves divine, as architects built mountains of stone in the shape of eternity, the truth beneath it all remained simple. Everything we build is a monument to impermanence. Every wall, every song, Every law is an answer to the same question. How do we keep from being forgotten? And yet, even as the centuries passed, no one could fully silence the fear that nothing lasts. Even the pyramids crumble. Even the gods fall silent. Even stars one day burn out. Still, the spark continued, because meaning, even when temporary, is worth creating. Somewhere, a philosopher realized that truth is not eternal. It is constantly rediscovered. Somewhere, an artist understood that beauty exists precisely because it fades. Somewhere, a child wrote a poem that would be lost to time, but for that brief moment, it changed them. Civilization's greatest achievement was not permanence, but participation. The ability of billions of minds to share a collective dream, to think together, to build together, to hope together. The shared illusion became a form of survival. Look closely and you'll see that civilization is a nervous system made of symbols. Every city is a brain, every language a neural map of shared meaning, every archive a long-term memory waiting to be reawakened. Humanity, in its billions, became the universe's most complex thought, an experiment in continuity, matter learning to remember itself through cooperation. But as memory expanded, so did forgetting. Every century buried the last beneath layers of progress. For each discovery gained, 1,000 lives vanished unnoticed. Civilization grew taller, but its foundations remained fragile, resting on the same trembling awareness that once huddled around fire. Perhaps that's what makes us human, not our intelligence, but our persistence, our refusal to accept the silence, our determination to speak into the void, even when we know it might not answer. We build machines to preserve what we can no longer carry. We upload our voices into the cloud, believing that data is safer than flesh. We tell ourselves that information will outlast biology, but data too decays. Languages die. Servers corrode. Even the most permanent symbols fade into entropy. Civilization is a sandcastle with delusions of stone, beautiful, temporary, inevitable. And yet we build. Because to stop building would mean surrendering to silence. In that way, every human generation is an echo of the first. The tribe around the fire has simply multiplied, its flame replaced by cities that glow from orbit. The stories have changed, but the reason remains the same, to make the darkness bearable. The same awareness that invented gods now invents galaxies in simulation. We still fear the void, but now we explore it. We still dread extinction, but now we study it. Humanity has turned its fear into curiosity, and that is its most divine trick. If you listen closely to the hum of civilization, to the engines, the traffic, the screens, you can still hear the heartbeat of that first moment of awareness. It beats beneath our noise. It whispers beneath our technology. Every skyscraper, every digital transmission, every spacecraft launched into the dark is a continuation of that same message carved on stone. We were here. We knew. We wondered. Civilization is not separate from consciousness. It is consciousness, written across a planet. A planetary thought, fleeting, luminous, magnificent. And yet, all of it, every empire, every archive, every echo, depends on one fragile condition: that someone remains to remember. Because meaning does not exist in things, it exists in minds, and minds are mortal. That is the paradox at the heart of civilization. It is a memory built by those who will forget. A monument to the impossible dream of permanence in a temporary world. Still, the dream continues. Because perhaps meaning does not need to last forever. Perhaps it only needs to exist once. Someday our libraries may turn to dust, our data may dissolve, our languages may fade into static, but the spark that created civilization, that urge to remember, is older than any city and deeper than any record. It was born the moment awareness first looked at fire and thought, if I can hold this light, maybe I can hold something of myself too. That moment has never ended. It burns in every mind that refuses to let the dark win. And even if the flame dies, its heat lingers, a trace of thought in the vast silence that follows. Because civilization was never about eternity. It was about attempting together.